So, you survived eclipse season. The proverbial dragon has retreated back to its lair, leaving a trail of destruction and chaos in its wake, which means that the month of October 2025 is going to be one in which we are acclimating to the new landscape, potentially picking up the pieces and rebuilding, or simply considering what to do with some of that fresh new real estate. But as the vultures begin to swoop in and pick at the post-eclipse carcass, many of us might be getting a sense that the world around us has somehow fundamentally changed. Whatever went up in a blaze of dragon fire during last month's eclipses, small in the grand scheme of things though they may have been, was nonetheless somehow vital to the overall structure. And there's a sense that it may only be a matter of time before larger structures around which we have built our lives begin to show signs of strain, or even begin to collapse entirely. I'm Kyle Pierce. This is the Astrology channel, and in this video I'm going to be diving into the astrology which surrounds the full moon in Aries, which will be coloring the first half of September, and how it might impact you, the world around you, and those other people walking around in it. All right, so our lunar fortnight officially began on September 29th when the moon crossed over into its third quarter phase. And we see this astrologically as the moon completing a square with the sun. And unlike the square between the sun and moon, which marks the beginning of the fourth quarter phase of the moon, the sun is on the right-hand side of the aspect. Because the sun is earlier in zodiacal order, the sun is in a superior square with the moon, or the moon is on the inferior side of the square. All right, so cool. What does that mean for this period of time in question? Well, the moon's entrance into its second quarter phase marks a distinct difference in the quality of time. In the first quarter phase, we go from the new moon, which is invisible. It has no light of its own. It's hidden by the rays of the sun. As it begins to separate, it starts to gain its own light. But throughout the first quarter, the moon, while gaining in light, it is darker than it is full of light. So in terms of, what we're bringing into being with the moon, or what the moon represents during the first quarter, is things which are just getting off the ground. They're in early stages of development. And it was generally viewed as a more favorable period of time for the moon, or for things related to the moon, because it has that quality of increasing or growing. Not a lot yet, but it's getting stronger. It's building up. But now, as we begin the second quarter phase of the moon, this phase was generally considered to be the most favorable for most purposes, because the moon at this point now has more light than it is dark. So it is actively strong and getting stronger, getting brighter. The foundations are sort of established. Moon is sort of coming into its own light, and it's got some momentum going. And this tends to be the most active part of the lunation cycle. And you can kind of see this in the way most activities go, or even how our days go, depending on your particular circadian rhythm. But we wake up in the morning, we might be a little groggy. It takes some time to get moving. We're rested, but we need to fill up. We need to eat breakfast. We need our coffee. We need, to drop the kids off at school. We got to do all the things that we got to do to set ourselves up for productivity. And then after we've done all those things, and we've kind of gotten our day started, we start to build some momentum. And it's usually during this period that we're maybe the most energetic, where we have the most energy. We're fresh, we're caffeinated, we're full of breakfast burritos, and we're getting stuff done. Then we sort of reach our apex, around midday, be our max productivity. And then for many people, they hit that afternoon slump. This is kind of that period, maybe a little after the full moon, where we've passed the peak and now we're starting to decline. And in the third quarter, we're sort of doing this wind down process, where maybe we take a little power nap, maybe we refresh our coffee, and we get maybe a little more focused on how do we wrap everything? How do we get everything that we need to get done for the day done? And we still have some energy, but we're aiming for the end of the day. And then by the fourth quarter moon phase, we're trying to get out the door and get to the part of our day where we wrap up any loose ends and go home to hopefully wind down, rest, relax, not necessarily do anything in particular, or maybe do some leisure activities. Your body is quieting down, the world is quieting down, your general activity level lowers, you begin to relax, and then, bedtime, right? At least I imagine some people have days like that. Sounds nice, but you get the idea. Back to our forecast here. So this period from September 29th to the full moon on 6th, we're sort of starting this kind of high point of our lunar month with the moon in Capricorn, which traditionally is not a sign that is super supportive for the moon. So we're kind of starting this period maybe with a lot of demands on our energy, but maybe not as much as we feel like we should have. And part of the reason that many of us may not be feeling quite as vital and full of energy as maybe we usually are is that we're coming off the backs of eclipse season. And eclipse season does tend to generally be a little bit of a weird time for a lot of people. Things get kind of reshuffled. Certain parts of our lives may take kind of an unexpected turn. And for many people, there's a general experience of just kind of not having as much, or their energy levels are sort of irregular and not following the normal rhythm, because an eclipse is by nature a disruption of the regularly scheduled light. So it's normal for things to get a little wonky. But this last eclipse in particular, the solar eclipse at 29 degrees of Virgo on September 21st, 2025, this eclipse hit a lot of us hard. Not only was it opposed by Saturn, but it is a part of Virgo, which they generally pretty hard on organic life in general, but overall for physical vitality. You see a lot of health challenges, or in some cases, just experiences where we just take some physical damage, or we're a little more prone to it when we have placements in the third decan of Virgo, or we have big transits there. And just by virtue of it being an eclipse and maybe a sort of third strike, it was opposite Saturn. And as I discussed during last month's forecast, this eclipse represents on some level the breakdown of some necessary component of a larger machine, potentially revealing, exposing a weakness in a system which had been sort of on its last legs for a while and perhaps finally broke and finished out its lifespan, right? Material things are finite. If we don't maintain them regularly, if we don't take steps to actively counteract or address the natural forces of entropy placed upon them, they will eventually fall apart. And because of the nature of eclipses, sometimes, it reveals something which has been long in the process of unfolding, but we weren't able to see. And also, because any astrological event is going to signify many things, it creates a disruption which is not seen, which is taking place underneath the hood. And it's not until later that we end up seeing the evidence of what took place, what was disrupted, or what shifted. This to me looks a little bit like, you're driving down the freeway and you hit a pothole and you hear something rattle or something snap that it doesn't sound good. But the car's still running, like things are fine right now. It's probably a good idea to, take the car in and get it looked at, but maybe we're busy, maybe we're in a hurry, maybe we are late for work, and, it seems to be running fine, so we move on with our day. And maybe the car runs fine for a day, maybe it runs fine for a week, but at some point down the line, we might discover that piece that broke, that gasket that blew and started leaking oil all over the carburetor. I don't know. I don't know anything about cars, but it maybe takes some time to wear down the other systems which depended on it, or which are now being impacted by the breakdown of that particular mechanism. But if we're paying attention, we might see the evidence. And I think this is something that, many of us can maybe see in the world. Certain events took place during eclipse season, which maybe on their own represented just one of many pieces in a larger mechanism. But with that sort of break or fracture, now other systems are starting to operate differently, or they're starting to break down. And, we may over time start to see more and more obvious and visual evidence of this shift that has taken place. Things aren't running the same as they used to. So potentially, depending on where this is hitting you, it might be good to take that part of your life in for some maintenance. Maybe we'll discuss it more in depth when we do horoscopes for each of the 12 signs, which I'm going to release as a separate video sometime over the next couple of days. But this is kind of the backdrop, right, for this period of time. So now, in the first week of October, we're maybe trying to give the car some gas, but it's just not accelerating the way it used to, or something's going on with the steering. Like it's just, have to work harder on it, not as responsive as it used to be. We're feeling some wear and, hopefully adjusting or addressing those things, but nonetheless, we're slowed down by it. And, maybe with the moon in Capricorn and even in Aquarius a bit in these Saturn ruled signs during this period, we might be a little less inclined to address those little lunar needs. We have other things to deal with. We're too busy. We just gotta, tough through it, right? And I think some level of that is likely required by most of you guys during this period of time. But, take some time for a maintenance check, whatever that means for you. All systems have been put under a lot of strain lately, and we don't want to neglect those systems, whether they're personal or otherwise. Now, the full moon itself, which occurs on October 7th, it's taking place at 14 degrees of Aries, and it's a relatively quiet full moon as far as full moons can be. Or rather, I'll say that the last aspect that the moon completed would have been over a day ago, and it would have been a sextile with Pluto, as well as a sextile with Uranus, in a conjunction with Neptune. It hasn't really had interplanet contact for a little while. It's been, in some ways, left to its own devices. The aspects that the moon makes to other planets, its last aspect, its next aspect, what aspects is it going to cover over the course of a day of motion for the moon, which is about 13 degrees. These are very important factors to consider whenever we're interpreting the moon in any kind of chart. It's so important, in fact, that we have like 5 different competing definitions for what a void of course moon is, which we don't need to spend time on. To some degree, we start to split hairs when we start to get too attached to the specifics of the rules, right? It might be more important to just focus on the fact that the idea of a void of course moon being a moon that is not making aspects for, some considerable amount of time, is generally viewed as a negative thing. And while it certainly can be, and in this case, we don't have anything that would qualify for that condition. What I have observed about people who have the moon void of course or close to void of course is, while there can be a sense or experience of kind of being adrift, of not a lot going on, not a lot of direction. I think what I've seen more consistently is that there's an ability to achieve a certain amount of internal silence that I don't think most people get to. It's having fewer things to process in your moon unit, right? In your brain and your body. It is potentially helpful in that you don't have so many different influences sort of getting smeared all over each other and combined and conflated, which has a lot of practical utility. Nonetheless, what does that mean for this? I mean, baked into the full moon is an aspect. It's an opposition with the sun. In a sense, what we have is a kind of a more of a clear and in some ways simplified moment to experience what the real essence of the full moon is, with less input from other planets. It's just the sun and the moon essentially equal in symbolic terms. They take up the same amount of space in the sky. The moon has exactly as much light as the sun does. Or at least its body is illuminated. And what the full moon essentially represents is literally a point of maximum moon, right? Which, right? But it's the lunar principle is physical. It is highly personalized hallucination, which is the product of the chemical makeup of your particular meat suit. It is the full immersion into life as experienced through the flesh, which is colored by, all these hungers, by emotions, by response to the environment, threats, the potential for pleasure or for comfort and sensual experience. And it's kind of an overload in a sense, which is why the full moon is kind of associated with this sort of wildness. It's the animal body in its peak power, and where it is able to maybe challenge the spirit, challenge the mind or the intention or the consciousness, and maybe in some cases facilitate moments of what we might call madness, which is more or less characterized by the lack of rationality. We're just our feelings and our hungers and our lusts and those instincts and impulses fully taking the wheel, or there at least being maybe a bit of a seesaw, push-pull between intentional, conscious action and, impulse-driven action. And I don't always like to use the term rational for the sun and irrational for the moon, because the actions of the moon or the actions of an animal, right, are perfectly rational according to the information and motivations, and are the product of many, many, many thousands of generations of product testing, essentially. The code for that instinct has worked enough times for it to proliferate. So if there is a sense of reactivity in the air around this full moon, it may lack foresight or lack the formatting, which defines, our decision template, which is modeled for us, which is ingrained into us culturally, socially, which takes, the needs of others into consideration, that takes the community or the social order into consideration. This is kind of just raw response to environmental stimuli. And it being a full moon in Aries, it gives it this every man for themselves kind of flavor. The moon in Aries, it has a tendency to be a little bit thematic, or sometimes the internal reality and state is made of, very visible to outside observers. Aries, pushes forward, pushes out. Unlike the other Mars ruled sign, Scorpio, it does everything out in the open. And what I find interesting about this full moon is that it is ruled by Mars in Scorpio. So the moon is sort of bursting with topics associated with what Mars is doing in Scorpio, or what Mars signifies there. And while it doesn't have a traditional aspect to Aries, so it is maybe less able to deliver its payload of significations to the sign of Aries in a direct way. It makes me think of that moment in a horror movie where the on-screen character is being stalked, or sort of moving through a room and knows that there's danger around, knows that Jason Voorhees is somewhere in the house waiting for a moment to jump out and scare him, or, the TV is going to emerge from the wall with the Saw guy and get his horrific death trap explained to him, but it can't see it yet. It can't find, the hidden threat. And in that moment of tension, and that moment of helplessness, the character calls out to the threat lurking in the shadows. It says, come get me, bro. I know you're out there. Well, let's throw down, because I can deal with that threat. That's a win-lose scenario. Either I kill you and move on with my life, or, you kill me and, well, we're done. That solves this problem in any case. And I think that's kind of the energy that we're dealing with. The atmosphere is this sense of maybe threat lurking, somewhere, or it's looming in the future, or, something's about to happen, but I can't stand just waiting and sitting on my hands and doing nothing. And so you may have a lot of people who are sort of making impulsive decisions in kind of response to this sense of threat, this atmosphere of unease, and maybe trying to provoke a confrontation or take some sort of action in order to alleviate it. And, we haven't really talked a lot about Mars and Scorpio, but Mars is extremely powerful and potentially quite terrifying in Scorpio, because it doesn't always represent a threat you see coming. It doesn't tend to attack you head on, nor does it go away after you, smack it down once or twice. It can be quite relentless and persistent in the pursuit of, whatever the hell it is it's trying to do. And the thing with Mars and Scorpio is you don't always know that you're under attack until you've already lost the fight, because Mars and Scorpio doesn't usually look for a worthy opponent in order to, test its strength against. It just wants to win. It just wants to achieve the thing. It's just hungry. While maybe Mars and Aries is like this projectile, this outward extending violent pressure, Mars and Scorpio is kind of an inverse. It's operating almost from like a sense of an internal vacuum and absence. And I think it's important to always consider with Scorpio is this idea of negative pressure. Desire, and especially the Scorpio style of desire, is an emptiness which wants to be filled. And as does a vacuum, as does any, fixed water system, which moves through differences in pressure at different points within that system, which basically means, like when your heart beats, it squeezes, pushing blood out, and then expands, creating negative pressure, sucking blood in. That negative pressure can be a very powerful propellant, right? That internal negative pressure is, in a sense, pulling you toward the object of desire, propelling you forward. And it quite literally doesn't stop until it is satiated, until it is that internal pressure is relieved, or until something blocks it. and nothing's really blocking it right now. Mars is pretty well clear the square with Pluto. And if you've been paying attention to the news in general, there was a clear difference between when Mars was in Libra, which came with its own, acts of violence, which one very prominent one we covered recently, but there was a distinct tone shift once Mars entered Scorpio, perhaps most notably within some of the actions taken by the Trump administration. There's a sense that maybe the gloves are coming off, and we have all of our justification, or we are pretty sure that nobody's really going to stop us, so we're going to do our thing now, do the thing that we've always wanted to do, and who's going to stop me? But it is still using, it's using a bit of cover. It's not just pulling out the missiles. In fact, many argued that the goal of the Trump administration in sending military forces to cities under the premise of bringing order to violent insurgents, or, in explicit terms, the enemy within, right? It's declaring the enemy in no uncertain terms, but it is positioning itself carefully, right? They are, or at least it would appear that they are trying to create the conditions for the use of violence, or to justify more overt military action, or the assertion of, control, of central government control on these areas. It's, spinning the web and trying to create the conditions for the prey to walk in, to facilitate the conditions for their own destruction. And that is how Mars operates in Scorpio. It's strategic, and it can be quite ruthless. And, Mars in Scorpio doesn't gain anything by entering into open conflict, or, exchanging blows between opponents of equal power. It wants to position itself in a way that it will be able to apply overwhelming force at the right moment and end things quickly, which in this scenario, taking over a city after being attacked by violent protesters is much more politically expedient and a lot less messy than starting a conflict directly, right? And while I think this is going to tend to be a long-term tactic, and one that we have seen already, Mars being in Scorpio creates a set of conditions where that activity is a lot more likely to be utilized and potentially more likely to be successful. So my advice to you is, stay out of the trap, however and to whatever degree that applies to you. This full moon, this sort of culminating moment after having had some time to process some ideas or experiences that are kind of coming from outside or the big world. And we're potentially seeing a lot of people making some maybe decisive choices about, where they're going to stand on a particular issue. There's sort of more and more evidence accumulating that we're not, in Kansas anymore, maybe, and we can't rely on the things that maybe we once did, or we're uncertain as to whether we want to. And when we go into these periods, we tend to pull in and sort of look after our own. When the system seems like it's unstable, we pull out of the system and we start looking for more reliable sources of support, which may, that can be jobs, that can be lifestyle routines and stuff, but it could be friends or loved ones. And we might be looking at this sort of maybe breaking from a more socially focused set of priorities for many people, investing in the stock market, reading the news, participating in the broader affairs of society at large, and maybe looking for allies, or looking for security and maybe struggling to find it. And I think for a lot of us, this is a good time to maybe sort out, what our priorities are, what it is we care about, what it is we are willing to take a stand on. And, we're entering a period where, as things change, as many of us find ourselves in bigger systems, which are kind of in flux, they're a little disorganized and chaotic, we're going to have to adapt and reposition ourselves within it on some level. And so knowing, what you're prepared to surrender, what you're prepared to not contest if it's challenged. If we're maybe seeing some economic uncertainty, we're maybe looking at what expenses we need to cut. What are we able to accept no longer being part of our day-to-day life or our ongoing reality, so that we can kind of consolidate what power we do have and focus it on the things that we really do value, that we really do want to protect. And this may look like a lot of people in your life sort of pulling back, maybe not being as available as they were before. Maybe you're not as available as you were before, but there's a sense that we're dividing up into teams a little bit, deciding, what world we want to live in and who shares that set of values and priorities with us. And then after this full moon, we really don't see an aspect between the moon and any other planets until a good, 15 hours or so later, when the moon applies to a square with Jupiter. And I think this is a very meaningful aspect. Jupiter is, in a sense, receiving the input from the moon. It's in a sign that the moon rules. And we're maybe feeling some tension between the sort of need to react, to do something about, whatever it is that we're feeling, whatever it is that we experienced today. And Jupiter sort of taken that message and saying, okay, maybe chill out. Let's try to get some bigger perspective on this, right? What we're feeling during this period of time, whether it's excitement or fear, or anxiety, or, whatever, that is a valid part of the broader picture, but it is not the full story. And, maybe immediately popping up with, whatever our first impulse is not the right or most productive course of action. So we may find ourselves needing to be corrected, or we may find ourselves needing to correct others or just ourselves in the day or two following, as we start to get a little more information, we start to calm down, and we start to come up with a plan as the moon moves through Taurus on October 8th and October 9th. And that's really what this second half of the fortnight, if you will, this third quarter phase of the moon, to be from October 7th to October 13th. This is collecting alternative perspectives, maybe shedding some things, maybe lightening our load a little bit to make ourselves more adaptable, and coming up with a plan. Not necessarily a long-term plan, but more of a plan to be more adaptable, to be more flexible, to shift as things shift. Because I got to tell you guys, we may have gotten a taste of the kind of changes that are likely to be a big part of the next several years or so, but we've only really just gotten started. We still have some time maybe to do some prep. We might get a little bit of taste of what the old normal was before things really get in gear in 2026. But this period is really about kind of getting ready to get ready to be able to respond to more shifting circumstances. Tighten up your budget, start socking away a nest egg, maybe create some auxiliary plans. If, something important in your life that you were relying on, what if that thing went away? What if your relationship to it changed? This could be a job, could be a relationship, could be a financial situation. All these things are potentially subject to these broader shifts. And if we tie ourselves to them maybe too tightly and they sink, we go down with it, right? So that doesn't mean like cut ties, but that means have some backup plans. Try to get yourself in a position where you can exercise options, or at least have some time to not be forced to make a decision immediately if something suddenly shifts, that you can make, more conscious, more deliberate choices with, as much information as you can get. So I think that's going to do it for the overview, and let's focus in a little more on some of the main transits and aspects for the first half of October. On October 8th, 2025, Venus in Virgo will complete a sextile with Jupiter in Cancer. Now, there's a game that I like to play with myself whenever I'm looking at some kind of Venus-Jupiter aspect or combination, and that is that I like to try to imagine what kind of party that Venus-Jupiter combination would throw. And this particular Venus-Jupiter combination, that party may look a little more like a papal coronation or some sort of highly ritualized, formalized ceremonial gathering in which the purpose for gathering has nothing to do with fun and everything to do with, in a sense, manufacturing a demonstration of status, or to formally acknowledge something which we want to be taken seriously. We want to demonstrate that it should be taken seriously by others. We have Venus in Virgo. It's still with the South Node, and it is within spitting distance of its degree of maximum fall. This isn't necessarily Venus who's in the mood to go to a Kesha concert. This is getting dressed for a funeral, and especially as immediately after completing the sextile with Jupiter, it begins applying to an opposition with Saturn. So we're very much dealing with a Venus that may be enacting a certain aesthetic. It's a little bit of a Lydia Dietz, maybe Venus, adorning ourselves in the garbs of mourning and grief to maybe acknowledge the passage of something which is no more. And while Jupiter's in a position to definitely make this more of a pleasant or positive experience, where we were achieving maybe a sense of unity or stabilizing a situation by performing this ritual of grief or of austere passage into some more consequential phase or event. But I mean, Jupiter in Cancer is already a pretty mild flavor of Jupiter on its own, but it is also applying to a trine with Saturn. Jupiter's operating a little more lean than usual, but it's bringing, what optimism or hope it can to what is maybe a grave situation. We're sort of approaching the degrees of the eclipse, which took place in September at 29 degrees of Virgo. We're reliving maybe that opposition with Saturn through Venus, who's, maybe making the funeral progress through the burning wreckage of the village. And I think this maybe looks for a lot of people like maybe solemn acknowledgement of what no longer is in the Virgo part of our lives. In this maybe process of acknowledging or assessing the damage, both in material terms as well as maybe in emotional terms, and maybe requiring a moment or a period of grief. This is kind of the gloomiest Venus-Jupiter combination I've ever seen. But however, it's something that I think is necessary. Jupiter in Cancer can be quite helpful for looking at difficult or emotional topics and finding ways to address the needs that those feelings speak to. So this may be a moment where we, by acknowledging, what no longer is, we are able to achieve some kind of clarity on how we potentially move forward, or perhaps if, it's something bigger that we need to deal with, we identify clearly that a moment to honor the passing of blank is at hand, and we're going to go through that process. So you're likely to find support in that process, or at least have that process in some way supported or enabled by circumstances. You may conveniently get some time off work to maybe on a more mild level. You get a mental health day, take some time to rest and recover and potentially tend to, what needs tending. Now, on October 11th, 2025, Venus in Virgo will apply to an opposition with Saturn in Pisces. And to some degree, we addressed this a little bit in the previous segment. So if you haven't watched that part already, you may find it helpful to do so. But what this aspect describes is a moment in which we are able to see and identify visually, physically, that something which was once loved, which was once desired or hoped for, is no more, is no longer possible. That may not be applying to you directly. That may be applying on a low-key kind of level. But this definitely has strong Edgar Allan Poe vibes. It feels rather bleak. And when we go to the funeral and we see the body and we have that moment of confirmation that our loved one is definitely not coming to breakfast tomorrow morning, it is sad. It creates a hollowness, right? If you are experiencing this more personally, more literally, it may feel tempting to project a sense of regret or fall into a kind of more spiritual depression in the sense of it, because maybe something was never fully realized, or because we feel the pain of its absence so keenly that, what was it all for? Was it even worth it? It's really just important to acknowledge the stages of grief. Use the moment to lay to rest what is no more and what can no longer be. Because often what we lose, when we lose something or somebody, is we lose all things that we could have done with that thing or with that person. We lose a whole future. And that takes time to mourn. And, fear not, there will be new loves. And perhaps sooner than you think. because on October 13th, 2025, Venus will enter the sign of Libra. Venus will immediately begin applying to an opposition with Neptune, now very early in Aries, soon to retrograde back into Pisces, as well as Venus will apply to a trine with Uranus and Gemini, also at 0 degrees, and shortly after a trine with Pluto at 1 degrees of Aquarius. And this initial entrance into Libra is maybe a little less of a cause to rejoice, or a moment of rejoicing that we might otherwise expect, because Venus is immediately confronting Neptune in Aries as a contrary body. This may be a vision of heroism or this kind of macho image or ideal that Venus, or we maybe see in the world, one which maybe glorifies violence or activities and behavior which offend the refined sensibilities of Venus and Libra. And while there is a trine between Uranus and Pluto, which signifies maybe a certain level of agreement or cooperation with what those things signify, we're looking at it in like broader social terms. We're kind of maybe seeing the world, this place which is starting to look very different than the world we once knew. And while on some level we see things which we understand, maybe that we can find a place for, that we even like, but we also see how maybe some of those things are contributing to things which don't jive with us at all. And the first decan of Libra in particular is kind of concerned with this idea of justice or injustice and the need to discern between moments where an offense needs to be called out, that needs to be addressed and rectified and brought back into balance, or if it is something better left unaddressed or would be more trouble than it's worth, or potentially create more imbalance in a situation. Some things we just got to let slide, and we'll see a bit of both, I'm sure. But I think we will see in others, or maybe experience within ourselves, a little bit of that righteously aggrieved Venus, which is shocked and appalled that someone could be so barbaric and so rude. And she's, asking her friends or looking to her friends for confirmation. And they're like, oh, yes, that was despicable. And they have their moment of shared disgust. And then they go have tea and crumpets, more likely than not. No, I mean, we may have our attention brought to something which is unfair, or may witness or experience a valid sense of being offended or violated, but it may be hard to find a single perpetrator or a clear origin of the offense. It's like seeing a preview for a movie that you just think is in poor taste, or you just get rude vibes from someone. And while there, maybe something achieved in calling it out to the degree that you can, it may just be one that you need to let slide and move on, because there are some very nice Venus and Libra days ahead, and the potential for pleasures and luxuries and delights and good company to come. And with that, I believe that completes our coverage of the first fortnight of October. Keep an eye out for horoscopes for all 12 signs, which will be posted in the next couple days, hopefully. And I want to take a moment to announce that in celebration of the Astrology channel recently breaking into the quadruple digits, we made it to 1,000 subscribers recently. And to express my appreciation to all of you who support the channel and make it possible, I'm going to be holding a drawing for a free reading with me. All you have to do is post in the comments the code word baby fingers, and you will automatically be entered into the drawing, which I will be doing during the forecast for the second half of October 2025 in just a couple weeks. And I will announce the winner of the drawing in that video. So if you are interested in a free reading, make sure you type baby fingers, 2 words, in the comments. And while you're at it, let me know how the eclipse went for you. I'd really like to know how you're experiencing all this stuff. And, really, I love just getting reminded that there are actual humans out there who are getting something out of this. Otherwise, if you would be so kind as to like the video. If you haven't already subscribed, subscribe to the channel. And if you have other astrology nerd friends who you think would appreciate the kind of astrology that we are doing here on the Astrology channel, please share the video. And if you would like to help support me and my work here on this channel, you can join me over on Patreon. Right now, it is kind of just support only at this point. There are occasionally patron-only videos being posted there, but I'm unfortunately a little limited in my time right now. There will be more consistent offerings available there in the future, but you can also book a reading with me at KylePierceAstrologer.com. And yeah, thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.